It has been a week since Xenoblade X Definitive Edition was randomly announced on that fateful Tuesday morning. To this day, I am still feeling weird about it. It's just surreal, I have to admit. But since then, I have been seeing so much fun discussion around the game, all the people talking about how they're excited to play it for the first time, all the people recounting their fond memories of it, and of course, the obligatory speculation around the gameplay changes and the story additions. It's just been awesome as a Xenoblade X fan since day one. But if you are a newcomer, I also made a video about the gameplay and how it might affect your perception about the game and your expectations, so definitely check that video out. This video though is just going to be more of a chill discussion. I'm not even on camera for this one. I'm just kind of shooting the shit, I have to admit. There's been some surprising topics that I've seen the past couple days, and I just wanted to give my quick 2 cents on them. Let's start with the fact that the trailer has already received 1 million views. I see a lot of fans celebrating this, and I'm happy about it too, but I have seen some sort of maybe overconfidence that it's gonna sell so well because of that. Maybe it'll sell better than Xenoblade 3. And look, I'm not saying those things aren't gonna happen, but I guess to me the view count isn't that surprising because let's not forget, let's not forget how we got here. We begged for this game for so long. It's basically been highly demanded since the Switch came out in March 2017. So when it finally does release this next March, it'll be 8 whole years of people asking for it. That is insane. If it didn't get 1 million after all that, I would be disappointed. And for as much as we joke about it being on a random Tuesday, I actually think that helped. Like, I saw a good amount of people not even really interested in X, but because it was so abrupt, because it was such a highly demanded game that just dropped like that, that really got more eyes on it. People were just curious, like, what the heck is this game everybody is suddenly talking about with no build-up whatsoever? The thing is though, just because it's a hot topic right now, doesn't mean it will be later. This is where the internet thinks way too much of itself. Just because something is highly demanded online, doesn't mean it guarantees sales. Yes, I do believe it'll sell well. I'd be shocked if it didn't hit 1 million. I'm just saying the job isn't done yet, folks. We've all gotta do our part in both buying and shilling the hell out of this game. Especially with this abruptly common talking point about a sequel, X2. I've seen a surprising amount of people who are absolutely convinced it's gonna happen. Some people even say it'll happen before Xenoblade 4. And I've gotta say, I find that to be pretty hilarious. How did we go from desperately begging for X to exist to now treating X2 like it's a given? Talk about an emotional swing. The main arguments I've seen is comparing it to Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition. Its epilogue foreshadowed Xenoblade 3, which released 2 years later, so surely the same will happen with X and X2. Well, you might have already heard, but I really hate these kind of arguments that rely on a pattern. I may have been an X-doubter proven wrong, but I still think the 10-year gaps are incidental. I mean, if you really want to talk about patterns, then we have to talk about how there's a 2-year gap between every Xenoblade game. So, would 2027 really give us X2 and a remaster for 2? I think that's where these patterns start to be a little bit unreliable in my opinion. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that sounds more unlikely than X on a Tuesday morning. I'm still dying on the hill that 2 Definitive Edition will happen sooner, which will leave plenty of room for Xenoblade 4, X2, a new IP, and whatever else we insist is happening in the future. Now how about we move on to the actual Definitive Edition itself? What can we expect or hope for aside from quality of life improvements? Most people are obviously expecting something like Future Connected, where we get a proper epilogue storyline alongside a huge new area to explore, that being the Bionic Shoulder from Future Connected. That was from cut content, and there was a lot of cut content from X, so I could definitely see that being a possibility for sure. You gotta remember that for as big as Xenoblade X is, and it really is massive, it only explores a small part of the world, Mira. There's plenty of other continents seen in the concept art, so I could definitely see them pulling ideas from that, where maybe you get to see a whole new region, a whole new continent. I wouldn't personally expect something nearly as big as a continent. I'm more so betting on a region. Like, I see some people bring up the specific idea of New Tokyo. That's one of the ideas that's brought up from the concept art and cut content and all that. But I don't know, I expect that stuff from a sequel more than a remaster. This remaster is already taking a lot more effort than Xenoblade 1's, you know? So I wouldn't necessarily get too much of a grand ambition here in terms of what they're adding. And I think that's fine because you can add in some story scenarios around the existing world and it'll still feel good because it really is massive. It's not going to feel tedious at all. Honestly, I wouldn't be upset if there wasn't a big new area to explore. I mean, it'd be weird if there was absolutely no new areas, but I'm more so looking at New LA because even within the confines of the existing narrative, the base version, the original version of X, I still think there's some cool potential you can do, you can add to New LA. Maybe some way to expand it further, maybe some new way to interact with the NPCs, just some fun activities in the post-game or end-game, because if we are getting new story content, which definitely seems like we are, and at that point in the story, you'd expect a lot of new stuff going on in New LA, and I want to see that reflected in the gameplay. I should acknowledge, though, that some very observant people have pointed out that Nintendo has only confirmed quote-unquote new story elements, not necessarily an epilogue. So let's say instead of an epilogue, it could be more of a director's cut. Like there could be cutscenes throughout the whole game, and then tacked on the ends, not like a Future Connected. I do think that is an equally likely possibility, but to give a rebuttal, Future Connected wasn't revealed until the second trailer. The first trailer for 1's remaster was similar to this recent trailer for X, where they just gave a little scene at the end, a little subtle nod for all the die-hard fans. Nobody else would realize, but if you are a fan of that game, you would know, oh my god, that's new. We can't read too much into what Nintendo's saying right now. All we can really do is just wait for whenever that second trailer for X is. Alright, let us begin with the spoiler territory. If you have not played Xenoblade X, or really all of the Xenoblade games, I would say that you should turn back now. Again, I have other Xenoblade videos you should check out. It's just a blast, so you go over there and have a good time. Alright, so first and foremost, we have to address the elephant in the room. Who the hell is the Black Knight? Well, it seems like the most common assumption that I've seen at least is that the Black Knight is Elma's old friend, the partner that she did battle with back in the day against the aliens, and then he saved her life and it was just sad. I could easily see that. Like, I think that is the most likely answer, just for the plot twist of, oh, he's alive. And oh my god, is he betraying Elma? You know, that sort of thing. It just makes for some sort of easy, sensible, yet intriguing plot development. Not to age myself, not to expose myself as a Xenoblade X fan since day one, but do you guys remember back in 2015 when people thought it was Dunban just because he had a cape? Hey, look, it's not as bad as 2022, where people thought Riku and Manana were Rex and Pyra. It's still funny, though. For all we know, this could be a character we have yet to see or hear about. But that's not interesting, is it? That's not fun speculation. Let's talk about how a few select people have really been dying on this hill that this person could be Malos. Or at the very least connected to Malos. Why is that? Because their voice kind of sounds like his voice actor. And I'll be real, I do kind of hear it. It doesn't sound like Malos, but you can see how his voice actor could make the voice that's in the trailer.
What are we in the end? This hunger I feel, this thirst, is it really my own? Or is it someone else's? Fancy seeing you here.
My name's David Menken, and I play Barnabas Thun. Barnabas is one of the most interesting characters I've had the pleasure of playing.
Fancy seeing you here.
You know what? If it somehow ends up being true, we all have to give a hand, both a pat on the back and a full-on applause to all those people who called it, because, yeah, that's pretty crazy. That is ludicrous. In terms of out there, it is stuck on a whole different planet, as one might say. I do kind of respect how ridiculous it is, because remember, Takahashi just refused to comment on why Malos or Logos were in Xenoblade 3. It was a very sketchy answer that made me, among many others, think that there's something more to Malos that's going to be revealed relatively soon. That's one of the reasons why I was so hell-bent on thinking Xenoblade 2 would be getting a remaster soon. And hey, maybe this whole time, somehow, some way, it was pointing towards Xenoblade X. In fact, maybe it's not as crazy as it sounds, because many fans are speculating. Perhaps the largest point of contention is whether or not Xenoblade X will end up tying to the main trilogy. X began as its own separate thing, but we know Takahashi. We know how batshit crazy this franchise is. And you can't blame the fandom either, considering how Project Exodus was mentioned in Future Redeemed on that legendary radio, which just decided to reference Xenosaga and Xenoblade X, just out of nowhere. And that made most people think that Meteor at the end was gonna be KOS-MOS. But what if it wasn't KOS-MOS? What if that Meteor is connected to Xenoblade X this whole time? To emphasize, this is just for fun. Don't take it seriously. I know some of y'all lore nerds are gonna come in here just saying, well, actually, it's just chill out. We're here for a good time. Hear me out. What if the Meteor at the end of Future Redeemed is the white whale crashing onto Mira? That means that Mira is the planet that Xenoblade 3 created. After all, the biggest twist about X is how strange and bizarre Mira is. It is not an ordinary planet. And if you were to ask me, the planet that Xenoblade 3 created would also be pretty damn abnormal, considering it's two worlds with different rules colliding together into one. It just seems a little out there, a little crazy. Something that would probably cause that planet to behave differently from others. This would also have to mean that planet Earth is the same in X and the trilogy, and that would be a full circle moment for me. When I first played Xenoblade 2 and I saw the land of Moritha, I was like, holy shit, is this a Xenoblade X tie-in? Is this Xenoblade X all along? Now, obviously, there's some plot holes, there's some inconsistencies, if you will. Wouldn't we see the characters, or at least some sort of civilization, from the Xenoblade trilogy? Instead, Mira and X just look so primitive. Well, there are several ways that they could answer that. As we discussed before, the Xenoblade X world is just a small fraction of the entire planet. So they could easily just be on another side of the planet, and they just haven't gotten the means to travel to each other yet. It could also be some sort of timeline shenanigans. I would not be surprised. The white whale landed 2 years after leaving Earth, so on paper, Mira shouldn't even exist yet. And also, there could be something to do with Origin. The biggest similarity in terms of the lore is between Origin and the Lifehold. They are two huge human-made things that are similar in preserving life. And in the end of Xenoblade X, they end up finding out that the Lifehold core is in ruins, so they should all be dead. Like, the whole game shouldn't even have happened. Mira could have affected both Lifehold and Origin, so if they affected the Lifehold in making them all alive, they could affect Origin and thus mess around with all the characters that are a part of it. And hear me out, Xenoblade X is called Xenoblade X. In Japan, it's pronounced Xenoblade Cross. Both X and Cross are common names for crossovers, when two things come together. Kind of like how two worlds come together to make one in Future Redeemed. Regardless of how much you want to argue against that, can we agree that if it did happen, and they made it make sense, then that would have to be one of the greatest plot twists in gaming, and would arguably usurp Xenoblade 2's last chapter. Remember how freaking mind-blowing it was when you saw KOS in Xenoblade 2. I would have to think that Mira being the planet from Xenoblade 3 would be crazier. There's so many more moving threads there, so many more games involved. I mean, that would just be insane. Again, very unlikely. Do not place your bets on that. Do not even hope for it. Just let it be something that where it does happen and it makes sense, it would be just the most pleasant of pleasant surprises. It deserves to be that. But there is an actual likely scenario. If that Meteor is not KOS-MOS, but it is still a recognizable character, then I would say the most likely candidate is Alma, because in the ending for Xenoblade X, Lyn goes on this whole monologue where she's talking about how she's confident that Earth is surviving out there, and one day humanity will find a way to travel back. And yeah, that planet in Future Redeemed is not the Earth that they knew, but it would be some sort of Earth, so that would be kind of like a cool way to tie everything together. The problem with that, though, is I don't know how they get to that in Xenoblade X Definitive Edition. Like, there would be so much. Like, why would Alma leave? I feel like there'd have to be an X2 to have a whole story that then culminates with Alma leaving. It just seems maybe a little too much, because what they have going on in Mira is already convoluted enough. Like, there's already so many questions that needs answering before Alma can leave. The last thing I want to say about both of those theories is that I don't think it's going to be popular. This might be the hot take of the video. If they do have to make minor retcons to X's lore, I wouldn't mind it. I would not be offended. Because even though usually I do not like retconning, in the case of Xenoblade X, its lore is already so ambiguous and so unexplored that I just don't hold it as sacred as the main trilogy. In fact, if we treat this as more of a director's cut, I think that's completely fine. However, the most important thing that I want to address when it comes to the potential story additions in Xenoblade X, if they do add direct references and connections, don't do it in a way where all of a sudden we're telling people, hey, you should play the trilogy before you play the Xenoblade X remaster. I don't want to add more homework to the Xenoblade franchise. You can add all the references and connections you want, but do it in a way that they've been doing the whole time on the trilogy, to be fair. They've been doing it in a way where newcomers can still come in and they can still enjoy it as a standalone story. I know that by itself is already a hot take among the most dedicated Xenoblade fans, but it's true. You can go into any of the Xenoblade games and just enjoy them for what they are. Keep Xenoblade X that way. It spoke for itself in 2015, so no matter what you add, please let it speak for itself in 2025. And luckily for me, that might be a silly fear to have, because after all, Lyn did lose one Monado hairpin. She's down from 2 to 1. So maybe that's Takahashi trying to tell us in a subtle way that we shouldn't expect too many connections to the mainline trilogy. Because that was just so random and so unnecessary. Maybe that's Takahashi trying to tell us something, man. Realistically, I wouldn't expect anything groundbreaking by any means. The speculation is fun and all, but don't fool yourself into feeling entitled, especially with X not being story-driven to begin with. At the end of the day, I for one am just excited to play an improved version of an incredible game, to welcome a whole new generation to said game, and to finally see what lies beyond its cliffhanger. Anything else is the cherry on top. It's gonna be a long couple of months, but just know, when the wind is blowing hard in December, it's just a reminder of our hopes coming true. It's a corny way to end it, but I wanted to end it on a reference, so there you go.